First, I'll keep it short. I know that Diane's been promising beer all day. Today's May 1st. My mother's birthday is May 1st. Her name is May. That's why she's up here demonstrating, showing cabbage she raised many years ago. I'm Wayne Raila. This is Michael Steigman. We both work for the Lab of Computer Science at Massachusetts General Hospital. Massachusetts General Hospital is part of a larger corporation called Partners Healthcare.
Maybe one thing we should make clear up front is that probably unlike anybody else who's presented today about their product or their platform, we're actually developers. We have nothing to do with the infrastructure at Partners.
Well, we're trying to influence the infrastructure at Partners. So
yes.
It's very interesting to hear all the discussion about the infrastructure. Our standpoint is as developers and what OpenShift does for us. I'm following Diogenes' suggestion of starting with who are we. So Massachusetts General Hospital, founded in 1811. It's a leading medical center. It's a teaching hospital. And just some numbers there that conveys the notion that this is a large healthcare institution. It's one of the largest private employers in the city of Boston and has a very long, proud history. Partners was started in 1994 by the MGH and another local hospital. And it's this large conglomerate of many area hospitals and clinics. And this is just to give you a taste. I mean, member hospitals, community health centers, healthcare programs. So combined with those 24,000, 25,000 employees at MGH, with Partners in all of its institutions, very large numbers of sites, centers, people, and we're just one part of that.
And each with a unique technical culture that, and history of innovation in healthcare IT that goes back, well, you're about to.
So, yeah, Lab of Computer Science. We were founded in 1964, which means we've actually been around for more than 25% of the hospital's more than 200-year history. So I'm pretty impressed by that. And we have, from the beginning, been a do-it-yourself shop. We were some of the people who were building, not me personally, but building running wires, building cabinets around teletype machines because the teletype machines made too much noise for the doctor's offices. And I'm mentioning this to convey the notion of having to build things for ourselves is part of what got us to where we are today. So for instance, 1967, MUMPS, the programming language which is used by Epic Healthcare, one of the largest medical record systems in the country. I don't know about in the world. Epic Healthcare is written on MUMPS, which is developed at the lab.
Over 50% of Americans have their health data in an Epic EHR.
One of the early systems was a time-sharing system. Before this, people didn't know how to share time on a computer. So again, that's sort of going back way far. But we also have medical education programs in which we create programs that teach subjects. We have training programs in which we train for the National Library of Medicine, graduate doctors in medical informatics. We've got diagnostic systems.
Anyway, did you do de-explain?
De-explain is a diagnostic system in which you can enter symptoms, come up with a set of disease suggestions, refine your diseases.
This is still covered in biomedical informatics textbooks.
And medical records. Really, we started building some of the first medical records in the world. We've tried many different kinds of medical records. And so have involved a rather large infrastructure, and that's not what I wanted. That has, of course, many of the things you need to have reliable, robust systems. Multiple devices for front end, multiples for back ends, database systems, standby databases, storage, NetScalers, source code repositories. These are all the things that we as developers ended up having to manipulate to put our apps out there. And we could do it because we had a core mission in the hospital that required us to have this large infrastructure and to have a team of staff that could maintain this, so that when we had new things we wanted to try out, there was a place for it here. And then for each of those sorts of sets of things, there's got to be multiple copies of it for development testing, 2 different data centers. And so what drove us to OpenShift? In about 6 years ago, Partners, the large corporate parent of all these hospitals, decided to buy a single medical record system, Epic, the system built on mumps developed here at the Lab of Computer Science all those years ago, which meant we no longer had that core relationship to all the systems in the hospital that were being built. We were one of many cores. We weren't the only core, but we were one of many cores. Epic came in and said, all of those things get put aside and replaced with Epic. So there's a huge investment in this Epic infrastructure, which we're not part of. And we no longer have the need to support all these different environments. We no longer have the need to have the staff to support all those environments. So we looked at how are we going to put out our own work without building it ourselves, and we said, well, let's go through the corporate provisioning process. The corporation has a way for us to apply for VMs. They'll build us a VM, and we can then farm those and so on. I started down that path. In August of one year, a couple years ago, I applied. The application says, what do you want to use this VM for? Well, we don't know beforehand. We don't know when a new trainee comes in and says, I want to learn how to do something. We don't know what that trainee wants. When the director says, hey, can we do this? I just got this great idea. Or a department tells us, we need a feature that you don't have. And we're just one of many groups in Partners at MGH that does these kind of exploratory development things. So when I started down this path of going through the corporate provisioning process, Michael and his colleagues were talking about containers and so on. And I said, I don't know about that stuff. I'm going to build it the way I know, because I know I can make it work this other way. And 3 months later, I had 2 virtual machines with nothing on them but Red Hat Linux. It took 3 months to get those 2 machines, lots of meetings, lots of discussions. So by the time I had finished building out these couple of machines with Ansible and Salt and all these other tools for provisioning, Michael said, oh, hey, by the way, we've got this OpenShift thing up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn over to Michael to tell more about.
Yeah. It wasn't quite, so it didn't quite happen in that order, But we were following, I think there was in this small group who was focusing on what would be the next generation of infrastructure at the lab, at least at the LCS. We were looking at Docker, and we were following some of the smaller PaaS systems. We hadn't looked at OpenShift, the earlier versions of OpenShift. But Kubernetes came out, and that started a discussion internally when we heard about the release of Kubernetes. And again, I went to Wayne and I said, he gave us the push off when we talked about containers, and I said, look at Kubernetes. And again, Wayne was like, yeah, come and talk to me when you're actually running something on it. And shortly after that, we discovered that Red Hat was investing in Kubernetes and building OpenShift 3 on top of Kubernetes. So I went back and I told Wayne, and he said, yeah, come back to me, when you got something running. But that's really, I'd like to say that we did this very thorough analysis of all the products that are out there. But the reality is it was kind of from a developer standpoint, it's kind of like a dream. We saw Kubernetes and OpenShift. We thought this gives us pretty much exactly what if we could draw it up in our head, what we could do, what would enable us to do the types of environments, stability and type of environments that we need. Essentially, get out of the infrastructure business, because with partners going to Epic, our lab was going to necessarily shrink down. So this would enable us to do it's like a developer's dream. Basically, almost. I mean, we've all seen the demos. It's basically a turnkey. You get your Django application or your Node application, and so we started tinkering with that, and so I think the key pieces of the, aside from the appealing nature of the platform itself, the key pieces of why we were looking at OpenShift was, one, it offered an on-premise container orchestration solution. And on-premise is important for us, like Wayne said. Now that there's this tremendous investment in Epic, this is the central clinical data repository at the organization. There are now walls up around that. It's very difficult to get. There's a process. There's a governance process around data use, data access. For the smaller labs that are trying to do innovative work in informatics, it's difficult to get access to that data. And although running services in the cloud seems like be natural for us to get out of the infrastructure business, it actually would put up a big obstacle. It'd be very difficult for us to actually spin up these services accessing Epic from the cloud. So on-prem,
not strictly speaking, just a technical issue. A lot of it's just governance and a natural disinclination on the part of the corporation to handle protected patient health information through a cloud service.
Yeah.
It might be possible to do it in a really secure way, but the culture in the institution isn't comfortable with that at this point.
Right. I mean, it's certainly possible to do it. There are companies out there. Cario is a small company that services smaller clinics and smaller hospital systems. Athena Health, I think, is in Massachusetts. They're actually starting to work with Beth Israel. But partners decided, for better or for worse, that they wanted to go the old school route and big iron, and so they made the huge investment in Epic, which is what most big medical centers were doing. So that's made it a little bit more difficult for the smaller groups within partners that typically had working relationships with the different partners' data sources. So there's a new data governance process, and it's a lot of the people who spend their time doing informatics at partners spend most of their time trying to get access to health data to do their job. It's kind of part of the, I guess it comes with the territory. So, and the other big piece of it was that partners they already had a pretty big enterprise Linux footprint. So The group that we were, part of our infrastructure was actually Linux, and we were working with the Linux guys at Partners pretty closely. So that connection was pretty, was pretty much instantaneous. Wow, this is a cool product. Red Hat is somebody we're working with. So based on that, we reached out to Partners, and they were actually interested in containers at the same. They were thinking of ways to use containers to reduce the VM sprawl they were dealing. I mean, we have researchers firing up MySQL databases all over the place, and those are proving to be difficult to maintain for Partners IS. So they were thinking about containers to help with that part of their work, but they didn't really have a concrete use case. So when we came to them, we started talking with the strategy group, and they were really excited. It was like, for us, it was a dream come true, because this is something that gave us pretty much everything we wanted, and Partners IS was very receptive. They were really excited to try this out, and the project, we approached them in 2015, and the project basically, the product and the project sold itself. We presented to the partner CIO twice, once for the proof of concept, and then to get the final approval back in January. And it's, all along the way, it was, this sounds really cool. So it was.
And that fits these institutions view themselves as leaders in research, leaders in technology. So to be able to support different groups, disparate groups with different abilities of experience with infrastructure and bringing up systems, this promises a way for them to continue to support that and maintain that reputation.
So, I mean, these are just some of the basic, kind of boring questions that we had to deal with before proof of concept. For us, for the lab, it was exciting to get to this point where we could do a proof of concept, but at the same point, there was a question of who's going to take on the risk. We need to buy licenses. We needed some consulting help from Red Hat. We needed hardware, and again, luckily for us, Partners leadership decided that they would take on that risk. And then just, the common things you need to do. These were things that we had nothing to do with: setting up the storage, setting up networking, load balancers, all that stuff. That was pretty much all out of our. We participated in it. It was a collaborative, but we weren't doing the work. It was Partners IS was doing the work. So we really didn't face much in terms of challenges. It was pretty much. Everyone really was excited about the project from the get-go. I think we're probably going to be facing more challenges in the future than we faced up until now, and one of them is certainly going to be marrying, the agile methodology, the agile kind of development processes that most of the groups use at the lab, and I'm sure other groups that Partners use with the enterprise change management, where you need to track, you need to be able to track when something goes wrong to an application that's being used in a clinical environment, something that could affect patient care. So that's a big thing, and we're working through these details now. We have a governance group that's meeting weekly to go over these issues. And the next is like Wayne was talking about, allowing the types of tinkering that we've done for so many years in this new environment. And that's we don't want to introduce a new framework and then have the same type of provisioning bottleneck that we're dealing with now with virtual machines. That really wouldn't be a step forward. So, and then of course, like I said, we're developers, so we're ultimately customers of the platform. So Partners has got to figure out how to get chargeback right so that this is sustainable.
Which, fortunately for now, as a leader in pushing the technology, they've given Michael free reign to use the system. We're not being charged yet, but that's not going to last long.
Yeah, as part of the initial groups that are helping pilot the system, we're for now, until they get the chargeback stuff in place, it's going to be free. So, and then I think other folks have mentioned getting InfoSec involved. which the partners as an InfoSec group, which is trying to get a handle on applications running in the enterprise. They're already at the table, and this promises for them, this promises a way to maybe get in on the process and stay on top of applications that are running. Whereas right now, it's sort of like, it can sometimes be the wild, wild west, because you provision your application, you say what you're going to use it for, and then you're up and running. You can't expose your stuff outside the firewall, but still, it can be a little bit scary when you're charged with securing the huge clinical data store. So next steps, Partners has adopted OpenShift as its container platform. So this is going to be the one platform for Partners. There are 3 groups putting apps in production. We've actually, the LCS has an app in production already in the proof of concept environment. The personalized medicine, Partners Personalized Medicine group is also going to be joining us. And these guys are actually doing some really cool stuff. They're building something called the Health Innovation Platform. They're trying to make it easier to build innovative apps on top of Epic. They're another group that's going to be putting their app onto the production environment. Then MGH Systems Biology, they also do a lot of work at MGH supporting the research enterprise there. And so these will be the 3 initial groups. So this won't have any impact on Epic, on any of the clinical systems yet. Those are really tightly prescribed hardware recommendations, and all big organizations like like Partners follow those. They like to follow those. You like to stay close to the tried and tested configurations. And so, although Partners does have, I think there are 75 people, something like that. Partners has brought in a team, a software development team, to work on customizing Epic. They're going to be in their own environment, at least for the foreseeable future. These big systems don't change that often. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that Epic is using technology that was put in public domain by our lab 40 years ago, something like that. So they don't change that quickly. So,
which, by the way, MUMPS, if you're not familiar with it, falls in the category of a NoSQL database. So this new term of NoSQL, we were way ahead of the curve on that.
So yeah, other than that, the new production environment is being built out right now. It should be up and running by the end of May, we hope, maybe the beginning of June. We've been running in the proof of concept environment on 3.2, and so we're looking forward to trying some of the new pipeline features. What else? I really want to tinker with charts, with Kubernetes Helm charts for packaging up our stack that we've built and some of the other stacks that we're going to put together. Anything else?
Just using it. I mean, it's so much fun to use it. You want to do something, you create a project, you bring up all these different pods that you already know how to bring up, but you're just wiring them in different ways. And if you don't like it, you toss it away. And all those resources are reclaimed for some other use. So as a developer, I didn't like having to do load balancing and hardware setups and make a DNS entry for all of the systems we're using and the routing and all those things you have to take care of. I had to do it to make my apps work, but it wasn't where my interest was. This allows me to focus on what is the application doing.
Yeah.
Great.
I think that's it.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right.
So we have time for a couple of questions while we set up the next session.
All right. There's a
One in the back.
right way in the middle here.
Yeah.
Can you get to him? And I'll.
Yeah.
How big was identity management for you guys, and considering OpenShift in terms of getting everyone maybe in your Active Directory or your LDAP and making sure that teams can work together?
That still is a big issue.
Yeah,
Are
that's,
you using it currently?
We have LDAP as the primary user authentication mechanism.
yeah, that's how we're getting, so we're synchronizing LDAP groups or partners Active Directory groups into OpenShift. We're trying to tie that in with Partners. Partners has its own homegrown app to manage directories, which would give us a little bit of the audit trail piece. So we're trying to tie that in, but it's probably not going to be part of our initial implementation. But that is a concern, an ongoing concern.
Essentially, the LDAP group membership gets imported into OpenShift and is used from OpenShift. So there needs to be a process that pushes it from LDAP into, or pulls it from LDAP into OpenShift.
There is. There's a tool that's part of OpenShift that will synchronize the people from Active Directory. So, and that's what we're using. But there's a tool that we have that allows a department administrator, allows you to grant a person admin privileges over their department, and then allows that person then to add people to that group. What we're trying to do is get that to synchronize, get OpenShift to synchronize to the OU that's under what that app controls, so that we can get that automatic population of OpenShift users, so that developers can get easy access to it.
So one quick last question here. So one of the use cases that you mentioned was some research groups using. So not only applications, but you have researchers that are running their applications on OpenShift, building applications. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Chet, you want to speak up? One of them's here. Well,
Well, yeah, we're actually doing a lot of widespread integration of data sources from our partners, getting microservices for application developers.
So our lab has a lot of genetic data, and we've been sequencing human genomes there for quite some time. And so we're presenting that as a set of microservices for diagnostic applications through our partners and integrating that into the EHR. But it's developers that are doing this at the guidance of researchers, right? So the researchers are giving us the requirements of what it is they want, and then the developers are actually implementing that. And we are seeing that it's a much quicker development time, that it does support the agile process. And it's also much more efficient use of resources in terms of VMs and computing. So yeah, we're totally on board with OpenShift and this model.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of research projects, so our intent is to try to promote this across the organization. There are countless small research groups. I think, did we mention that Partners gets this is second in terms of NIH funding?
National Institutes of Health.
So we get like
funding for
something
health
like
research.
$230 million or something like that between Brigham and Women's and Mass General. So there's a lot of research money, and there are a lot of people doing small little projects. They have, 2 developers that are firing up, local Docker images to do this or to do that. So that's, those also that'll also be the audience for potential users of the system. They're not yet right now. It's the lab. It's partner. Chet is from Personalized Medicine, but there are a lot of small research groups that would be able to take advantage of this, and it would help them do their work.
So I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this or if it's directly related to what you're doing, but I'm from a startup accelerator in Seattle, right? And we have a lot of young guys coming to us working in the area of integrating endpoint devices in the healthcare industry. You have patients rolling in, you have heart monitors, you have blood pressure monitors. All these are IoTs. Containers is a great way of gathering data from them and working. Are you actually working in this space at all, thinking about, do you cater to that market within the MGA ecosystem? And the reason I'm asking is obviously you set a precedence for the rest of the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
We aren't directly working with those data inputs. Certainly, there's plenty of people at the MGH, but we're not
No, not yet. Chet, are you guys doing anything?
Right. So there are groups.
All right, so it sounds like there's a
All
group
right.
that we need to get into an OpenShift Commons briefing to talk to about
Yeah.
that. So that sounds like another topic. I just want to get the next speaker up there
Yep.
and move right along, so thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.